In an alternate reality where Jon Snow never leaves the Wildlings, the course of his life and the fate of Westeros would change dramatically. Instead of returning to the Wall to face his destiny as a member of the Night's Watch, Jon would fully embrace the life of a wildling. His choice to stay with them would shape the fate of the North and possibly alter the very course of the war for the Iron Throne. Jon, born a Stark but raised as a Snow, has always struggled with his identity. His time with the Wildlings allowed him to experience a different kind of freedom, unshackled by the rigid structure of Westerosi nobility. Had he chosen to stay with the Wildlings, Jon would have become a leader, a warrior among people who valued strength and honor over titles and bloodlines. The first major consequence of Jon's decision to stay with the Wildlings would be his rise to power among them. Jon's natural leadership abilities, honed during his time at the Wall, would not go unnoticed. Under Mance Rayder's leadership, Jon would learn more about the wildling ways, their customs, and their struggle for survival. However, Mance's death at the hands of Stannis Baratheon would leave a power vacuum that Jon could fill. His deep understanding of both the Night's Watch and wildling cultures would make him the perfect candidate to unite the fractured wildling factions. Jon would quickly rise as a powerful figure, likely becoming the new king beyond the Wall. His Stark heritage, combined with his wildling loyalties, would make him a leader capable of bridging the divide between the two cultures. As king beyond the Wall, Jon would work tirelessly to create a strong, unified wildling kingdom, one that could stand independently from the rest of Westeros. His rule would be marked by a deep understanding of the hardships the wildlings face and a commitment to protecting them from the looming threat of the White Walkers. His leadership, however, would be tested early on. While Jon's charisma and strategic mind would allow him to gain the respect of the wildlings, his past as a member of the Night's Watch might create divisions. Many wildlings, especially the more traditional factions, might see him as a symbol of the very system they've fought to escape. Jon's decision to lead would be met with skepticism by those who mistrust anything related to the Night's Watch, even if Jon himself was one of the few members who had ever truly understood their struggle. But Jon's fierce loyalty to the wildlings, combined with his desire to keep the North safe from the White Walkers, would earn him the respect he needed to lead. He would strengthen the wildlings' defenses, fortify their positions, and begin preparing them for the inevitable invasion from the army of the dead. His time with the Night's Watch had prepared him for battle, but leading the wildlings against the true enemy, the White Walkers, would become his ultimate challenge. Jon's leadership would also create a shift in the power dynamics in the North. With him as king beyond the Wall, the wildlings would become a formidable force that Westeros could no longer ignore. As the wildlings gathered under his banner, Jon would begin forging alliances with the North's noble houses, including the Starks. However, this would not be without conflict. Sansa, in particular, would likely be hesitant to accept Jon's position as king beyond the Wall, especially if it meant putting the wildlings in direct opposition to the South. The Stark family, especially Robb Stark, would have to reconsider their stance on the wildlings. With Jon as the king of the free folk, the Starks might need to decide whether to recognize his rule and offer an alliance or continue their long-standing animosity toward the wildlings. Robb, who had once waged war to protect his family and the North, might see Jon's rise as a challenge to the established order, even if he was Jon's half-brother. The North's traditional values might clash with Jon's new life among the wildlings, creating tension between the Stark children. Meanwhile, the Lannisters, particularly Cersei, would likely view Jon as a wild card who could disrupt the fragile peace they have worked so hard to maintain. His status as king beyond the Wall would raise concerns in King's Landing, as it would bring a united wildling force closer to the south. If Jon were to ever set his sights on the Iron Throne, his wildling allegiance would make him a dangerous adversary, especially to Cersei, who would see him as a direct threat to her power. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen's quest to reclaim the Iron Throne would face its own set of challenges. Jon Snow's rise among the Wildlings would add another powerful player to the game, one who would not bow to Daenerys's claim. Although their goals might align in the fight against the White Walkers, Jon's allegiance to the Free Folk would put him at odds with Daenerys's vision of a unified Westeros under her rule. If Jon and Daenerys were to ever meet, their differing approaches to leadership would lead to tension and rivalry. But the most significant conflict would be the one Jon faces with himself. His Stark bloodline and his connection to the Free Folk would place him in the middle of two opposing worlds. He would constantly struggle with his identity, whether to embrace his Stark heritage and fight for the North, or to fully integrate with the Wildlings and lead them as their king. His relationship with Ygritte, had she survived, would be a major factor in his decision. She would likely push him to fully embrace the Wildling cause, while his inner Stark sense of duty would always urge him to return to Winterfell. Jon's choices would define not only his own fate, but the future of Westeros. If he fully embraced the Wildlings and led them into battle against the White Walkers, he would solidify himself as one of the greatest kings in Westeros's history. His reign would be marked by unity, strength, and a commitment to protecting the realm, but it would also leave a lasting mark on the political landscape. The South would never view him the same way, and the future of Westeros would be uncertain. As Jon Snow fully immerses himself in the role of king beyond the wall, his leadership would come under increasing pressure. His position would not only challenge the established power dynamics in the north, but also confront the kingdoms to the south. The Free Folk would finally have a leader capable of organizing them, but this unity would make Jon a significant player in the broader conflicts that were brewing across Westeros. The battle against the White Walkers. With Jon's focus on the threat of the White Walkers, his first order of business would be to unite the Free Folk and prepare them for the imminent invasion. His knowledge of the enemy, gained during his time at the Wall, would be crucial in preparing the Wildlings for battle. Jon, with his keen instincts, would rally the clans of the Free Folk, convincing them that their survival depended on standing together. With his leadership, the Wildlings would be more organized than ever before, allowing them to mount a defense that had never been possible under Mance Rayder. Jon's relationship with the Starks would shift from one of estrangement to a reluctant alliance. Sansa, now in power as the Lady of Winterfell, would be initially skeptical of Jon's new role as king beyond the wall. The North had always viewed the Wildlings as a threat, but Jon would argue that the survival of the realm depended on uniting against the White Walkers. Sansa's pragmatic and protective nature would make her hesitant, but she would eventually come to see the truth in Jon's words. In time, the Stark children would have to accept that the Free Folk were their allies, not enemies, and Jon would become a bridge between their two worlds. The conflict with the Lannisters, especially Cersei, would be complicated by Jon's actions. As king beyond the wall, Jon would be more of a wild card in the Game of Thrones. The Lannisters had already been weakened by their internal struggles, but Cersei's desire for control would make her see Jon as a dangerous threat. However, Jon's primary focus would be the greater threat from the north, and he would make clear that his main interest was in protecting Westeros from the White Walkers rather than engaging in the political maneuvers of King's Landing. Cersei's ability to manipulate the throne would be further tested, and she would find herself in a precarious position as Jon's growing influence began to challenge the status quo. Jon's influence on the south. While Jon would initially focus on defending the realm from the White Walkers, his growing prominence would eventually lead him to the southern conflicts. His leadership would likely attract the attention of Daenerys Targaryen, whose own ambitions for the throne would conflict with Jon's growing power. Daenerys, who viewed herself as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, would see Jon as a rival, especially given the Wildlings' independence and their loyalty to Jon. However, Jon's status as a leader of the free folk would make it difficult for Daenerys to ignore him. Though their motivations might align, both wanting to protect Westeros from the White Walkers, Jon's refusal to bow to her would cause friction between them. Jon would be resistant to bending the knee to Daenerys, as his loyalty would lie with his people and the North. His relationship with Daenerys would be marked by conflict, as both would have strong convictions about how Westeros should be ruled. Jon's preference for a more egalitarian society, where the people's voices are heard, would put him at odds with Daenerys' more authoritarian approach. The political rivalry between Jon and Daenerys would not be limited to just personal tension. Their influence in Westeros would begin to shape the future of the realm. Daenerys would seek to unite the Seven Kingdoms under her rule, but Jon's rising influence would serve as a powerful counterweight. The clash between these two powerful leaders would play a critical role in the outcome of the war against the White Walkers. Jon's legacy and the fate of the Iron Throne. Jon's decision to stay with the Wildlings would ultimately shape his destiny. His refusal to return to the Wall and reclaim his position within the Night's Watch would make him a king in his own right, but one with his own principles and ideals. His focus on survival and unity would earn him the respect of both the Free Folk and the North, but his unwillingness to follow the traditional paths of Westerosi power would alienate him from many others. As king beyond the Wall, Jon would establish a kingdom that valued strength, unity, and survival over political games. His leadership would be defined by his ability to unite people who had long been divided by cultural and regional differences. The North and the Wildlings, once bitter enemies, would unite under Jon's leadership, allowing them to stand together against the greater threat to their world, the White Walkers. But Jon's power would not remain isolated to the North for long. As the Wildlings' king and the leader of a unified force, Jon's potential would be too great to ignore. His rising influence would challenge the traditional rulers of Westeros. The Iron Throne, which had once been the seat of power for House Baratheon and House Targaryen, would now face a new contender in Jon Snow. The fight for the throne would no longer be about bloodlines and titles. It would be about the future of Westeros and the ability to protect it from the threat looming in the North. Ultimately, Jon's legacy would not be defined by his conquest of the Iron Throne, but by his ability to unite the people of Westeros against the White Walkers. His rule would be remembered for its pragmatism, strength, and willingness to put the survival of the realm above all else. While he would remain a figurehead for the Wildlings, his influence would spread across the Seven Kingdoms, shaping the future of Westeros for generations to come. The end of the Old Order. With Jon Snow leading the Wildlings and working in alliance with the Starks and other key factions of Westeros, the Old Order of Westeros would be irrevocably changed. The Iron Throne might still exist, but it would be a symbol of unity rather than tyranny. Jon's leadership would bring about a new era for Westeros, one where honor, unity, and survival took precedence over power struggles and personal ambitions. The White Walkers, ultimately defeated through the combined forces of Jon's Wildlings and the Southern Houses, would no longer be the primary threat to Westeros. But in their wake, a new vision of what it meant to rule the Seven Kingdoms would emerge. Jon Snow, king beyond the Wall and the true hero of Westeros, would reshape the realm into something that his father, the Night's Watch, and even the Targaryens never could have imagined. A land united not by blood or conquest, but by common purpose and shared survival.